Hi, in this video, I'm going to talk about square root function part 2. Alright, so where the square root function, okay, we're choosing a function where, for example, there is a square root of x plus 1. X plus 1. Right? So this is a square root function with linear function. So very simple. As you see that you want to sketch a square root function, you have to understand the concept of square root. So where the function inside the square root, the linear function inside the square root, have to be at least 0, right? So why is it? You should understand. You should not memorize why. Okay, square root, it must be at least 0. You must understand why. Why it must be at least 0? Because it's only defined when you put a value that's 0 and above. Okay? So then you have x at least negative 1. Right? So from here you know the domain. You know the domain. The domain will be negative 1 up to infinity. Right? The minimum will be negative 1 up to infinity. So, okay. So without finding the range, you can sketching the graph of this function. So if you have negative 1, if you have negative 1 means it's starting from negative 1 here. Starting from negative 1 here. With positive here, so I have talked about in the previous video. I hope you know the pattern. So if you have square root of x, if you have square root of x, then you will have the graph to be in this way, right? If you have fx to be square root of x, but if you put a negative there, the graph will be reflected about the x-axis, right? So this is all that you learn. So let's see, have fx equals to square root of negative x. So the graph will be going in the negative direction. And if you have fx equals to negative square root of negative x, it's the same thing. So if this function, if you put a negative here, it will become reflect in the x-axis, right? So now we go to this part here. If you have negative 1, right? You have negative 1. So you know then the in front here is positive, right? Positive here. So positive, the graph is always above the x-axis. You will see that they were always above the x-axis, right? Either they go to the right or go to the left, right? So remember, very simple. As long as the positive, the square root in front of the square root is positive, the graph must be above the x-axis. So this either go to the left or go to the right. It depends on the domain, right? More than means they were moving to the right. Moving to the right. So this is the square root graph. So square root graph, of course they will intersect the y-axis. Intersect y means x equals to 0. So 0, substitute with 0, the y will be square root of 1, which give you 1. So this is a graph for square root of x plus 1. So of course from here you can read the range. By graphical approach means you're using graph to identify your range. So you have to know the graph, right? So the graph will be from 0. With range refer to y-axis. There are no graph here. Can you see? There are no value of there are no graph here along this negative value of y. The negative value of y. So it's only on above, right? The graph will be non-stop. If you keep sketching, it will go to infinity. So it's from 0 up to infinity. Alright, 0 and above, there is a graph. Alright, so this is the graphical approach. So if you use algebraic approach, you know that square root of x plus 1 will be at least 0, right? This one, square root, at least 0. So definitely the fx will be at least 0 and the y will be at least 0, right? So it's the same. It's 0 to infinity. So very easy. So what happened? Now I'm going to ask you about, I'm going to modify this question. So, okay, case number 2. What happened if the fx is negative? If I put fx here to be negative square root of x plus 1. That's my question. What happened if you put a negative square root of x plus 1? So the graph You see how's the graph change. Of course, if I said already, if you put a negative, this one is always positive. When you put negative, it's become always negative. Means the value of y always negative. Means easy. The domain not change. The domain won't change. Supposed to be this way, right? Without the negative, supposed to be this way. So with the negative, the graph is reflected. Reflected. So means the 1 here will become negative 1. So all the positive value of y here will be turned to negative. And it's reflected about the x-axis. Alright? So, okay, I give you various case. So if you have a negative square root of x plus 1, negative square root of x plus 1. Let's say you go and add by 1. If you plus 1, what happened to the graph? So you have to understand this also. So what happened when you plus 1? Right? You plus 1 to the graph. So means that if you plus 1, the value of the y will shifted above by 1 unit. Bergerak ke atas 1 unit. So means from here, there's the 0 here, right? The 0 here. So it will be from 0, it will go on top at the negative 1 here. Supposed to be this way, right? So they will go on top by 1. Can you see this point here? This point here. So from 0, it will reach 1. So will go by 1. And from negative 1, you also have to add by 1. Okay? Plus 1. So it will be at 0. So the graph will be everything shift above. The shape will be still the same. But can you see this thing is going up by 1. Going up by 1. And this one going up by 1. Then the graph will be moving in this direction. Okay? This is the shape of the graph. So from here you can know the range. The range. The domain is still the same. The domain will not affected because the domain is follow the one inside the x plus 1 must be at least 0. Just this one must make sure it's positive. But the range will change. The range will starting. The graph will be from negative from 1 and below. Right? Means the graph is there are no graph above here. So it should be negative infinity up to positive 1. Alright? Negative infinity up to 1. The maximum value is 1. Alright? So I go again. Let's say if I have fx, let's say if I have fx equals to square root of x plus 1 minus with 2. What happened? So the same thing, you need to know the graph. You need to know the graph for this function. So you know that this is the graph, right? This is the graph. So now you just minus 2. Minus 2 means you're shifting the graph vertically downwards. Vertically downwards by 2 units. So suppose square root of x plus 1 will be supposed to be negative 1 to 1. Right? Supposed to be, this is your graph. But now you have minus 2, right? Minus 2 means from here you have to shift from 0, you have to go down to negative 2. So from this point, you will reach here. For 1, you minus 2. You take the 1 minus 2, you reach negative 1. So means the graph will be at negative 1 here, right? So it will shift 2 units below, 1, 2, 1, 2. So the graph will be in this way, right? So this is the graph. So I'm going to erase this one. I'm going to erase this one away. So this is the graph. This is the graph for this function now. Alright, so the range will change. The range will change. So the range here will be, okay, you see the graph going upwards, right? There are no graph below here. The square of graph is going up to infinity. Start from negative 2, minimum negative 2 up to infinity, right? So this is you using the graphical approach. The graph, you look at the graph, you identify the range. So let's say if you want to using algebraic approach, kalau you pandai, you tak nak guna graph, you boleh guna secara memandang saja. Memandang, you look at it, you view. You know that square root of x plus 1, you are very mathematically enough, you know that this will be at least 0, right? At least 0. This one sure positive. Paling kurang pun kosong, right? So, apa jadi? What will happen if you go and minus with 2? Very simple. What happens if you go and minus with 2? So definitely, this side also you minus with 2, right? What is this? This is the y, right? Your y. So means your y will be at least negative 2. At least negative 2 means that your range will be negative 2 up to infinity, right? Negative 2 up to infinity. So this is the way you're using algebraic approach. Or you're using graphical approach. You sketch the graph, you read the range from the graph, right? So it's from different angle you see the domain and range. So if you I'm going to do one more video for you about the square root function so that you understand.